UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasion, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
Well, good evening, greatest audience on the planet. Welcome to UAP Crossfire on KGR Radio DB. Chris DiPerno and Don Ecker, my eminent and most qualified co-hosts for this show. Lots of kind of fun news tonight. I think we have a fun guest for you on the show tonight as well. As always, when I have the lead chair, I always like to remind everybody the ending comes first. God's peace that surpasses all understanding and knowledge. My wish and prayer for all of you out there. Some other really kind of fun, big news that I want to make sure I get right. Darcy Weir and Andy Marcial are going to be joining the KGRA DB lineup this Wednesday, 8 to 9 Eastern. Last night on UFO Twitter is the name of the show. It's going to have a very unique format that they're working up. I think it's going to be well worth it. They were our guests last week. It was a great show with them. I am very, very happy to make this announcement tonight, and I am looking forward to them taking to the airways via KGRA DB. Before we bring our guest in tonight, let me turn it over to the co-hosts and see how they are. Chris, how are you this evening?
I am doing great. Got over COVID. You know, I'm feeling good. Got my energy back. And I'm going to have a great show tonight with Dan Carlson. I think this is going to be great. You know, he's got so many things. He's so diversified. I don't even know where to start.
Good. Well, don't. Since I haven't announced who the guest is, let's try to keep that a surprise for a couple seconds. Don, let me turn it over to you. I know that you want to wish the United States Air Force happy 77th birthday. That was yesterday, because I know how much you love that service. And you talk about it a lot on the show. Also, I meant to add in the opening, today is International Talk Like a Pirate Day. Very, there you go. Matey. Just get that out there for all this. Did you get that? How are you tonight, Don?
We love Zoomies. Always have loved Zoomies. They go up, they fly around a little bit, go back to a nice, clean bed, hot chow. They've got a great life, Deuce. So, yeah, this is really great. 77th birthday. They broke away from my army, and hey, you know, we were happy to see them go. They wear pretty blue clothes. You know, it's really wonderful.
Well, as a former member of the Air Force, I salute the Air Force, and I spend a lot of time with the Air Force these days. Don's remarks notwithstanding, happy birthday, United States Air Force. With that,
I will tell you one thing about the Air Force. They got the best chow halls in the service. They have unbelievable chow halls.
There is something to be said about Air Force cuisine. Now,
yes, it is.
Since we one quick more tie-in before our guest joins us. Don talks a lot, rightfully so, about his service in Vietnam. And I like to think that Don may be the inspiration for this first video clip we're going to show tonight. Chris, if you don't mind running the very special boat.
Do I really talk that much about Vietnam?
No, but when you do, it really leaves an impression.
Oh, okay.
Well, here you go, Commander.
Sounds good, Chris. Thanks.
Wow.
I understand they spent about $300 building that, and I was pretty impressed.
I'll give him 500. I want one of those.
Looks like a lot of fun. I was pretty impressed. It was just something fun that came up. All right, back to
you said he made that. He made that from basically discarded trash.
Yep, that's correct.
Wow.
Put together with some standard boat propulsion technology there, but he used the gaming stuff, put the solar panels to provide some of the electricity on it. Pretty impressive, and looked like it'd be a heck of a lot of fun to whip around on the water with it. So
that guy's got serious talent.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you think about putting twin 50s on that?
There you go.
That would be good. That would be a great thing, wouldn't it?
Or twin 50s? I don't know if they'd handle twin 50s, Chris. Maybe 30s.
30s.
Okay, 30s.
Once again, the Army and the Marine Corps arguing over caliber size. Interesting.
Hey, Marine Corps always goes big.
Never go big or go home. Well, our guest tonight, Mr. Dan Carlson, whose call sign tonight will be Padre Dan tonight for our show, is a very accomplished man. If you have the opportunity to read a little bit about it, here's Dan joining us. Dan, good evening and welcome to UAP Crossfire.
Good evening, gentlemen. It's an honor. But I must say about that watercraft, if it doesn't have a live well and a trolling motor, I'm not interested.
Yeah, well, that I'm sure for bass fishing, that would attract the most interesting bass. There's no doubt about that. The envy of other people, if you were bass fishing in that, would be pretty interesting as well.
Yes,
now,
and Dan, the game warden would be there too.
Dan's got a pretty unique connection to this show. He contacted me earlier this year. He had actually reached out to Martin Willis earlier, and then Martin connected him up with Mac Maloney. Mac Maloney is how Dan tracked me down, and then when I joined this show. So he's kind of a super fan of the show. We started to have some really good conversations. He told me about some of the books that he had. Chris, if you can bring up the two books, Species Unknown, and its follow-up sequel, Species Unleashed. Dan is probably, as I said in the write-up, what I consider a Renaissance man. He's a perfect fit with Chris and Don, with the very varied backgrounds, a lot of disciplines that have been studied and explored. And we had quite a bit of fun in emails and getting to know each other that way before we actually had the chance to meet via phone. So it's great to have you tonight, Dan.
Thank you.
I think we have an interesting show for the audience lined up. I will try to survey anybody who wants to write direct an email during the show. If you catch it, I've got it up there on the signature block on the Cryon there if you want to give me a quick drop. And I try to check the chat room. So, Dan, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience a little bit and give a quick rundown of the background?
Sure. I live in western South Dakota with my wife in the Black Hills. I'm a pastor currently. My background includes several years of broadcast meteorology. I branched out with my own business into forensic meteorology, which our two former Leos could probably address. I then went into writing. I became a newspaper columnist while being on the air doing weather. Caught the eye of Cabela's headquarters in Sidney, Nebraska. They hired me to do a number of roles there. And so with a combination of meteorology and ministry and writing and media, that's just a high-level view of Dan in a nutshell. The two books that you saw are science fiction fantasy books. They went to number one in the Christian fantasy chart on Amazon.com. That's where you can find it, Species Unleashed and Species Unknown. Now, what brought me into this conversation was something I heard on a UAP podcast a few months ago. There was a guest there, an accomplished scientist, who made some very disparaging remarks about people of faith, basically implying that we don't have the intelligence to be a part of the UAP discussion. I kind of got my hackles up a bit. So I started reaching out to the commander and Martin and some others and said, I think that we do have something to offer. And one of the things that we need to do today as a people, and I'm just going to say this blanket everything here, is to recognize each other as individuals and stop putting each other in boxes and say, well, because he pastors a church, he doesn't have anything intelligent to say about science or UAPs or anything else, or because this person is a secular scientist, me being a Christian, I'm not interested in what they have to say. I think that we can all benefit by having good conversations with one another, and I'm looking forward to a good one tonight.
Well, I gotta say something quickly, Commander. Padre, the bottom line is, unfortunately, and it's been true now for a number of years, there, in my opinion, seems deliberate attempt by person or persons unknown to keep us all divided. Divided not only by political choice, divided by spiritual as opposed to non-spiritual choice. It's a deliberate thing, because once you have everybody divided, it's much, much easier to control. And that person you're referring to, whoever that was, is obviously a major butthole to make a blanket statement like that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't take it personally, and I wouldn't be too concerned about it. His ignorance is self-explanatory.
I agree, Don. But I did want to bring into this discussion tonight, when we're looking at what UAP are, what the possible options are. We've got, are they man-made? Are they misidentified objects? Are they time travelers? Are they interdimensional travelers? And then there's that fuzzy category of demons and angels. And I think, in my view, more than one thing can be true at the same time. I think that as we look at the UAPs as a whole, we may be able to find something from each category here that's valid. What cannot be disputed is people are having encounters with craft and beings that they can't identify, and they don't know who or what they are. And as we enter this discussion and try to search for answers to that question, it's important for us, as Don said and as others have said, that we respect one another, listen, evaluate what's there, and in our own minds we have the option. We can eat the meat and spit out the bones, but still be cordial. So that's what I'm after.
So,
wow.
Dan, maybe it's a little bit soon, but
yeah.
I do want to interject that one little thing that we talked about on our call. A while back, we had a guest who said, we should be calling the show UFO Crossfire. That UAP was one of those kind of divisive things that were kicked up. So I'm trying this on Don and Chris, and I don't mean this with any sacrilege whatsoever. I think you guys all know I have a pretty pure heart on this subject. But when I grew up, it was the Holy Ghost in the Our Father, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And then it became Holy Spirit as a young guy growing up. So I'd like to think that UAP and UFO have that same relationship. Obviously, yeah. This is flying over everyone's head like
no, it's not. No, it's not. It makes no matter all to me. Okay, no. Either or. I prefer actually UFO. That's what I've always used.
Right.
But
UFO magazine.
Exactly.
And we might be betraying our age a little bit here.
No, I can't believe you would even go there.
I know, you're the younger one, Commander.
Not by much.
In the other room, my wife is sitting with her leg
Say what?
For the longest
Padre, that wasn't a great statement to make. He's the younger one. How do you know our ages? You're already starting on a bad foot with me.
I'm counting the tree rings, okay? my wife is in the other room, and she's got her leg up, and she was working with the remote.
Oh, honey, the guest tonight is really insulting the hell out of me.
And she was saying, why can't I just get that UAP thing? I want to call it UFO. And, everybody is like that who is of our generation.
Sure.
Well, do you mind if the old man asks you a question?
Yes.
Okay.
I bow to my senior.
Thank you, Pi. Oh, baby, you're good. You know, one of the things I wanted to ask you right off is you have 4 undergraduate degrees. And I got to tell you, that's amazing because, I mean, it took me God knows how long to get just one. So what were your degrees in, Padre?
My first associate degree was in a general studies from a community college that had an independent study program for gifted students. So I took that opportunity to create my own study program in meteorology and interned under some of the best meteorologists in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area that were working for the CBS affiliate, WCCO there. And that's how I got
That's where you started, right?
Yeah, that's where I got started in TV weather there. They then put me through the University of Minnesota, where I got my bachelor's in communications and minored in physical geography. I guess it's called Earth Studies today. From there, I went to the Mississippi State University into their broadcast meteorology program, and I got the certificate of completion from there. And then the last certificate is from Bible College, ministerial credentials, and becoming an ordained minister.
Now, you did all these technical degrees, communication, earth science, meteorology. That's fantastic. What led you to get into ministry? Why did you all of a sudden shift to, I mean, I look at all these technical degrees that you have, scientific in some ways, and then you go to more of a philosophy type of base. What did something happen to you, or was there something that pulled you toward? Well, I mean, that's a reasonable question.
When I took my aptitude test in community college, the counselor said, you need to be one of 3 things. You need to be a priest, a farmer, or a military commander. And so
the same guidance counselor I had. He told me I used to be a farmer. The only thing I'd become is a garbage collector. That's pretty much what he said.
You know, I'm one of those guys who's just never figured out which half of the brain, right or left, I was. I just have an insatiable curiosity about things. And I was raised in a Christian home. I'm the son of a World War II veteran, sergeant in the South Pacific Theater, Bronze Star winner, Army, Don. And he raised me right. He and my mom did. I went to church twice on Sunday and every Wednesday night growing up. And like most people my age in the teens, you have a period of time when you test the barriers, you wander away a little bit. And then I came back into the faith. And because I've always been an outgoing person in terms of public speaking, I started teaching Bible classes. And then pretty soon, it wasn't long before a pastor said, I'm going to be gone Sunday. Can you fill in for me? And I went filling in for several Sundays. And then it wasn't until we moved to Nebraska that a church called me up. They didn't have a pastor. And they said, could you fill in for 2 weeks? Well, I ended up being at that church for 6 years. And From there on, it just kept going. I've always been, since 2009, I've been in ministry part-time until 2 years ago when I went full-time.
That's fantastic. What is SWOT? I mean, you do opportunities and threats?
Yeah, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Cabela's created a position for me that internally we called Strato, and that was strategic, time-driven research and analysis of threats and opportunities. And I published a daily briefing that went out through the corporation on what was happening in the various elements of news. We had the economic report. We had, of course, a detailed meteorology report and how it was going to affect all of our retail locations that day. We talked about emerging technologies. We talked about politics. We had a section, kind of like a newspaper, for everything there. And that was really where I hit my element. I loved that job, and it was really great for me. So that's what that stands for.
So before I shut up and turn it over back to Commander, I want to ask you this last question here. And this is something that is important to me because during the course of learning about UAPs, UFOs, and one of the things that stick with me is Don's paper that he brought up. And one of the things in that paper is really the idea that these things are not friendly. And so I started researching what Don had written, and I come to believe that they're not friendly. I don't think they're here for our best interest. And I think there's a spiritual component. And the reason I say that is because I'm a fan of Tucker Carlson. And, Tucker Carlson was a big UFO nut.
Yes.
He always had it on his shows about UFOs. And then he stopped. And I was wondering why Tucker Carlson stopped. So I searched the internet and stuff, and I found an interview between him and Joe Rogan. And it was pretty frightening because he stopped because what he found out was so scary. And I want to play this and then maybe get your reaction to it and stuff. Is that okay to do that?
The deeper level is so if they're spiritual beings, which I believe they are, like it's a binary. They're either, you're on team good or team bad. You can assign any name to it you want, but like, what are these things? Are they good or bad? And I think some of them are bad. And if the U.S. government knows that, or the people within the U.S. government know that, then they're serving a bad force. And
well, when you say spiritual, like what makes you draw that conclusion that they're spiritual?
What's the obvious? I mean, spiritual may be the wrong word. Supernatural. They're beyond nature as we understand it. I mean, obviously they are. I mean, just chart their physical behavior. It doesn't, it goes outside of what we understand about physics. No visible means of propulsion, coming at indescribable speed, hitting the ocean, continuing at speeds that are impossible undersea. I mean, in other words, if I take a 9mm round or 7.62 by 39 and shoot you at 50 yards underwater in a swimming pool, and it's even more intense in salt water because it's denser, you could catch the bullet if it even makes it to you, right? So if you have a craft, any object underwater that's traveling at 500 knots as measured by sonar, right there you're challenging our understanding of physics. Like, what is that? How can that be?
So I like your comment on that, Padre.
I agree with what he said, and I'm glad he corrected himself from spiritual beings to supernatural beings, because we are spiritual beings. We are not physical beings that have a spirit or soul within us. We are spiritual beings housed inside this shell of flesh and bone. And we know from the Bible, and I would say even from some texts of religion that aren't the Bible, that there seem to be two sides to the universe, a good and a bad, right, wrong. And in the Christian faith, the head of the bad we call Satan, the deceiver. And people have a misconception about Satan. They think he runs around in a red unitard with a pitchfork and is the supervisor of hell. The Bible tells us hell was created for him. That's where he's going. But right now, he's roaming the earth looking for people to take with him. So his mission isn't to get you to worship him. His mission isn't to get you to sacrifice goats on an altar and wear pentagrams. No, all he wants to do is cause you to lose faith in Christ and not pursue that. And then he has succeeded in taking your soul. So what I want to do is increase awareness about this tactic, because scripture is clear that as the clock winds down, a lot of things are going to happen. We're going to see a lot of weird stuff in the sky. Bible tells us that. And we're also going to see a great deception that's going to come upon the human race. And I don't really know what that is, but I'm wondering if that might be related to UAP. For example, and let me just throw a hypothetical at you here. I did this with the commander on the phone a few days ago. Let's say that a couple of years from now, we have that great moment when a UAP lands on the White House lawn. Disclosure, you can't hide it anymore. They're there. And here comes this being out of this thing and says, we've been watching you a long time, and now it's time for us to come and kind of give you a little help along. We're going to cure your diseases. We're going to cure your famine. You're not going to have to fight each other anymore, because we're going to see to it that every nation has what they need to thrive. It's all going to be a paradise on earth. Just one thing. There's a group of people over here that we don't think are going to be assimilated to this, and we need to get rid of them. So let's say maybe it's Christians, Jews, Muslims, gays, people with dark hair, whatever it is the aliens don't want, that group of people has to go. In exchange for paradise on earth, if you're not part of that group that's been
welcome to 2024. Yeah. I think part of that is happening right now. We've never been so divisive in the world as we are now.
I heard a shocking statistic today. It was on the radio that, and we're not going to go into politics here, but I'm going to use an example. 28% of Americans from all parties think it would have been better for the country if the sniper's bullet would have killed Donald Trump. That's more than a quarter of our fellow countrymen think it would have been better for America had that effort succeeded. So already, in answer to my hypothetical question, you've got a quarter of the population or more that's willing to sacrifice some life for a greater good. And that's troubling.
Well, maybe so, but here's another statistic to figure into that. And that is 74 million people roughly voted for Trump in 2020. Now, a lot of those people are military veterans, or quite a substantial number. And there are a lot of people that would see that as the opening shots fired at Fort Sumter. Now, if you know anything about history, you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
That could have been a very bad day.
It could have. But I have a list of questions here that I want to ask you guys, if you'd be so kind as to allow me.
Go ahead, please.
I'm fairly new. Oh, yes.
No, I said, please, Dan. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm fairly new into the UAP experience. I had some sightings when I was younger, and I can tell you about that later. And just recently have become with this renewed interest. And my knowledge of the subject pales in comparison to you gentlemen and probably most of the people who are listening. But as a pastor, in order to determine, are these beings good or bad for humanity, I'm interested in what they are saying. And I know you gentlemen have investigated a number of cases. Is there a repository somewhere accessible to someone like me that has cataloged the messages that these beings have given to the people who see them?
Aside from the Bible, I'm not good. And I don't mean that with any kind of sarcasm at all. I think you know where I'm at on that, Dan. Don, you're our lead person for this.
As far as an archive, I am not aware of anywhere where that might be available. Howsoever, on a historical level, going back to the late 1940s, the 1950s, there was a movement within the, at that time, UFO field, flying saucers, which actually was more prevalent then than even UFO. The UFO acronym actually came from the United States Air Force. But there was
another reason to celebrate their birthday.
Exactly. There was a movement called the Contactee movement.
I remember.
And at that point in time, you can find this online, okay? There have been many books written about the contactee movement, the various contactees. And basically, without going into who they all were, the overwhelming theme at that time by people, human beings that alleged to have been contacted by what they referred to as the Space Brothers was getting rid of our nuclear weapons. Now, that goes much deeper than simply on the surface, getting rid of nukes. Hey, nukes, let's face it, they're bad. Nukes are very bad. Nukes kill everything, all right? Flowers and puppies and kittens and especially people. They destroy buildings. Now, at the time, we were in the midst of the Red Scare, the communist threat, okay? The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover saw this message as a potential national security threat. And they began investigating secretly these contactees, people like George Adamski and, oh my heaven, there were many, many others. And the bottom line was the messages that these people were receiving, allegedly, are in many of those books. Now, that's one area you could check. In the 60s, all right, at that time, back in the 50s, looking at it in hindsight, it was not very sophisticated. In the 60s, it began to get a veneer of sophistication. One of the people that helped that process along was a man by the name of Donald Keyhoe. Keyhoe had been a naval graduate from Annapolis back in 1922. He became a United States Marine. He became an aviator. He led the first air squadron from the United States into the island of Guam. Later, he was involved in an air crash, which necessitated his retiring. This was in the late 20s, early 30s, from the Marine Corps. He became an aviation writer. And it was in the mid to late 1940s when he discovered this phenomenon of UFOs, flying saucers. And he began some in-depth research. Later, he became the director of NICAP, the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And as an aside, because of his military academy associations, one of his classmates was the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Roscoe Hillenkotter. And Hillenkotter sat on the board of NICAP. Now, their main shtick that whole period of time was trying to get Congress to hold hearings on this. And the government vehemently fought back against that. Finally, hearings were held in 67, 68 because of a lot of other business that was going on. But the bottom line was the government of the United States, the military, the intelligence agencies had one primary objective: to shut this down, which they ended up successfully doing. But of course, shutting down things like Project Blue Book, which was basically a U.S. Air Force whitewash of the subject material, didn't do a thing because the UFOs kept showing up. I'll shut up now, Commander.
No, not at all.
No, not at all.
So you mentioned this stuff going on. I'm a child of the 60s, and when I was still in grade school, I had seen this thing in the sky, and I got interested, and I picked up a book called The UFO Experience by J. Allen Hynek. And, he was relating, I forget, this might have been early 70s. He was relating some of these things that you were talking about. And what annoyed me, even as a grade school child, is when you see what people are reporting, and then they come out with swamp gas or a lenticular cloud. Well, being a meteorologist, I know a thing or two about lenticular clouds, and you'd have to be a few drinks in before you mistaked one for an actual spacecraft. And pretty lame stuff. At least now it seems that the government is coming to a point, well, they're there, but we don't know what they are, which I don't necessarily buy either. And I think they're coming into something a little more sophisticated than vaporous material as to what they are. But yeah, that was a period of time of great suppression, which I think continues today.
Well, Padre, to tell you the truth, I've been involved in this field now going on almost 40 years. My wife began a publication in 1986 called UFO Magazine. She was a working journalist, had a journalism degree. We met in 1988. Thank God it clicked. We ended up marrying, happily married to this day. And for over 20 years, we published that magazine. Now, my background was as a criminal investigator. I was a police officer, like Chris. Chris was a homicide detective. That's something I think this show has that is very, very unique, because we both ask inconvenient questions, okay? And as a result of that, we really bored in on and I had a series in the magazine that ran for a number of years called The Whistleblowers, where I exposed in print and also on my various radio programs. I've been a broadcaster since 1991, okay? Where I've exposed these people trying to pull a fast one over the UFO public. A lot of times as a money-making scam, or they were seeking celebrity, whatever it was that made many of these scamsters operate, okay? But the bottom line is, and you had mentioned something that I want to address. The bottom line is, when I first really became heavily professionally involved, I was then convinced that this was a nuts and bolts phenomenon. In other words, I was convinced they were coming from another star system, and some of them undoubtedly have. But as time went on, and I was in the middle of some very strange cases over the years, I began looking at other possible probabilities of what some of these things are. Interdimensional. Now, when you talk about interdimensional, you're talking about, apparently, for the most part, sentient beings entering our universe from another universe through some type of portal. And I've been involved in some cases where that seemed to be the most viable solution. But there's also another possibility that you and I also briefly addressed earlier concerning the Great Flood, okay? Roughly 12,600 years ago, something beyond momentous happened to this planet. And when it happened, not only did the oceans rise many hundreds of feet, but vast millions of fauna and giant fauna seemingly disappeared in the blink of an eye. And when I talk about massive loss of life of giant fauna, I'm talking about things like saber-toothed cats, things like short-faced cave bears, things like giant ground sloths, okay? Animals that were bigger than a Volkswagen Beetle or a Buick sedan, okay? Suddenly, giant woolly mammoths gone in an eye blink. Now, whatever that was, and I am convinced it was because of an astronomical event, a comet or parts and pieces of a comet hit not only Northern Europe, but North America, which caused the ice sheets, sometimes 2 miles in depth, to melt in a matter of weeks or maybe a couple of months, that screwed up the conveyor belt that Gulf Stream that runs up to Europe and back that keeps the planet relatively temperate, that basically got all fouled up. We had another mini ice age. And when that happened, how many millions of human beings were either killed or displaced? Now, if there was a relatively advanced society or culture at the time, and God only knows how advanced they may have been, because if we were getting visitors from off-world here, I'm sure there was some type of liaison present. What if some of those humans, advanced humans, left the planet because they could see what was happening, and later, when things calmed down, came back? And I have a reason for saying this, believe me, they went underground. There's a heck of a lot of proof that somebody did some very extensive underground work, not only here, but around the planet. Okay? So what if some of those beings are actually human beings, the descendants of the ones that left and came back? And why are they hiding? Well, good God, if you turn on the news tonight and you take a look at the news, that might be one big reason they're hiding. But at any rate, that's my personal take on what you were talking about.
Would you entertain an alternate theory?
Absolutely.
Okay. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we have these first chapters of Genesis that tell us a little bit about what life was like then. We know that there was lush vegetation, the Garden of Eden. We know that it did not rain on earth until the time of Noah's flood. The Bible says that everything was watered from underneath. These waters beneath, these subterranean sources of water, came up and tended to the roots of the plants on the surface. There was something in the sky called the firmament. There's speculation as to what this may be, so I'll put out a theory. A layer of ice crystals surrounding the outer atmosphere of Earth. This layer of ice crystals would have had a number of effects on life on Earth. One effect would have been this screening out of ultraviolet light. All those things, diseases and so forth, cancers that are caused by ultraviolet light would not have existed then. You've got this greenhouse effect around the planet. Now here's where it intersects with your theory, Don. Man sins, God decides he's going to start over. What if he sent a comet? Now, up until this time, the Earth has not been tilted on its axis. It's been oriented vertically, meaning the weather is the same at the North Pole and the South Pole. Suddenly, this big ball of ice comes crashing through the firmament. And let's say it hits Siberia instead of North America, as you posit. What's going to happen? Immediately, all of this ice is dislodged. And as it falls, it melts and creates torrential rain. The Bible says that the surface fractured and the water came up from beneath. So this comet hits the earth, and like cracking the surface of an egg, all these faults develop, and all that subterranean water comes up, the heavenly water comes down. Now, the atmosphere is suddenly supercooled at the point of comet impact because they're made of ice. This is how you get mammoths with frozen meals still in their stomachs, and we can still find them today. Perfectly preserved specimens of mammals that were flash frozen. This impact, what if it suddenly rocked the earth on its axis? If you've ever taken like a snow globe and you suddenly rock it back and forth, you see the tremendous waves that are created. You would have mega tsunamis that wash over any island or coastal community anywhere on the planet. And like a ringing bell with vibrations going back and forth, this process would have continued for some time. The Bible tells us the rain alone continued for 40 days and 40 nights. So that's one theory I'm just throwing it out there. And, people can mock me for that or, whatever, but that's a possible solution that ties into scripture that covers a lot of what you said, Don.
Well, we know that roughly 13,000 years ago, half of North America was covered in ice sheets. Same with Europe. Okay. Now, something caused that ice to dissipate, to melt, to go away. Recently, within a number, and I don't offhand recall how many years ago, in Greenland, all right, a massive 100-mile in diameter meteor site or asteroid site that was hit was discovered. Right now, it is under massive amounts of ice. So we know giant astronomical objects have impacted the planet many, many, many times in the past. Good Lord. All you got to do is, if you have a telescope, go outside, look at the moon, and you'll see all those massive craters on the moon. Well, Earth is not much different, but the reason we can see what happened to the moon, they have no climate up there. They have no air. They have nothing to basically cover up the impacts. On this planet, we do. But we are finding where objects hit the planet all the time, especially with our space-borne satellites today that we can examine the planet from the altitude of our satellites, spy satellites. So yeah, it's not a mystery to me. And you talk about Siberia. Siberia is a very interesting spot. Remote, very, very few people have ever made it to Siberia, except the Russians, of course. But in the 1930s, National Geographic, my grandfather's brother had been a subscriber to Nat Geo since the late 1890s. And when he passed on in the early 1960s, his widow sold to my father all of those National Geographics going back years, okay? And when I was a kid, oh my Lord, that was something I loved to do. I would jump into those, start going through reading articles and what have you. And I'll never forget one from around 1937, I believe it was, somewhere in that time period, where the article was talking about some Siberian hunters that found some flash frozen mammoths. All right. And as you said correctly, they even found buttercups in the animal's mouth. Well, these animals were so well preserved that the article stated those Siberian hunters actually butchered the animal and ate the meat. Okay. So yeah, something happened, but they also discovered giant boneyards of these animals. And the only thing that could have explained what had happened were giant 1,000 miles per hour wind that literally picked up herds of these animals and smashed them apart. So whatever it was, Padre, that happened, it was momentous.
Indeed. I want to circle back and touch on some things as you brought up. When you were speaking earlier, Don, it was like you were backing up a dump truck of information and dumping it over me. And I just want to pick a couple of goodies here. You mentioned portals. I'm into portals. If you read my books, there are plenty of portals in the books. interdimensional. Okay, this is one of the leading things that people are saying these beings might be as we look at a multiverse scenario. Well, there's concern among some. What would the news of interdimensional beings do to people of faith and religion? My response is verify what we've been saying for centuries, that there are other dimensions. There is a spiritual dimension through which angels and demons apparently can migrate into Earth. There are dimensions that separate us from the afterlife. There is a hell, there is a heaven, and we're going to one of the two places, depending upon our relationship with Christ. So as we look at portals as a possibility, I'm all for that. And what we have too is we have some people who are looking to the UAP occupants, and their hope is that these beings here in our time of crisis on Earth will come from the sky, that they will insert themselves into human history, that they will provide a way by which the human race can save itself so that the future can be enjoyed by all with peace, no more sorrow, no more pain, no more crying. Well, we know that story. It's the story of Christ coming from the heavens to earth, giving himself on a cross for the sins of mankind, rising from the dead, and then the invitation to join him in eternity. So there are religious overtones here and spiritual overtones that link together when we talk about the UAP situation and matters of faith. The word angel in both Hebrew and Greek translates literally as messenger. So when we see like the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary to the annunciation that she was going to have the Christ child, it would be a messenger from the heavens. So throughout Scripture, we have interaction in the Bible from heavenly messengers inserting themselves into the affairs of humanity. And I would say to people who find this interesting, who may not have read the Bible, pick one up and read it and see about these interactions. And why I was so concerned about the messages that they're giving is because that can tell us a little bit about what side they're on. Now, I'm not former military, and I thank you guys for serving our country as you did, but I try to play strategy sometimes. And to my mind says, if a obviously technically advanced race comes and tells me to give up my most powerful weapon, is it because they're afraid of what we could possibly do to them if they were to come and invade? You know, if a stranger comes and knocks on my front door and says, "Hello, Mr. Carlson, I'd like you to give up your guns because they're bad." Well, no, not happening. So has anyone approached it from that angle?
Well, okay, you've opened up another Pandora's box.
Surprise!
Well, Don, I'm gonna put you on hold here for a second, Don, because we got all 5 minutes to the end, and I want to give Chris a chance to jump in. Chris,
Sure.
Well, to answer your question, Padre, that there is a catalog of information of contactees who have explained about their experiences. We've interviewed them. I've interviewed all kinds of contactees, and I got to tell you, 99.9 of them, the communication is frightening. The experience is frightening. It's one of those where there's no negotiations, there's no asking. I come through a dimensional portal in your room, which a lot of abductees have done, or a bright light, and they're there. They take you to an unknown place. They only basically say to you, they lie. They absolutely lie. They say, "Hey, we're not going to hurt you." And the people who have had the abduction experience have tremendous amount of pain. And there's like you talked about, there's a spiritual component to this, because one of the things And we actually have it in the Mutual UFO Network questionnaire, is if you put in the name of Jesus, does the experience stop? And a lot of them will say, yes, the experience has stopped. And that's one of the things that when we interview them, we find that the people who have been abducted become much more spiritual. Even though they don't see or recognize a spiritual component to their tragic event. And you got to remember, these people are being kidnapped. Mm-hmm. They're not being asked. Nobody's coming down and saying, hey, we like to take some stuff from your body because it's going to help us or not. They're taken in the middle of the night. They're brought to an unknown place. Things are extracted from their body without permission, and they're experimented on in some of the most horrific ways. And anybody that tells me what a wonderful experience they had during such a thing like that, I tend to be a little suspicious, because most of them say, Chris, I don't ever want this to happen to me again. I don't ever want to go through that again. It's one of those things where we say, oh my God, this has got to stop.
Chris, I have a question for you.
No, I'm going to jump in because we're right at the break here.
Right after the break.
Okay. Our special guest, Dan Carlson, call sign Padre for the show tonight on UAP Crossfire, is our very special guest and a super fan of the show. We've been talking about Dan's experiences and understanding into this very interesting way of approaching it. You can check DanCarlsonWrites.com as a really great place to start. And we will talk a little bit about his books. I have a couple questions when we come on the backside of the show. Thanks for tuning in, UAP Crossfire. See you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to UAP Crossfire on KGRA-DB. Chris, Don Ecker, my co-host, special guest tonight, Dan Carlson, call sign Padre. I do want to throw out that I see Andy, Catholics, and Raf are in the chat room, and I always welcome guests. I haven't received any emails tonight. Also, some really great news. If you saw our show last week, our guests last week, Darcy and Andy, are starting up a show this Wednesday night. And that show runs 8 to 9 Eastern time. And it's last night on UFO Twitter is the title of it. It's going to have a very interesting format from what was being shared in our pre-show warm-up as we were getting together. So please tune that in. They were great guests, like our guest tonight. Before I turn it over to Chris, Dan, I want to make sure that we mention your books. For anybody who heard your opening that was here for the first part of the show, often when something rises high on a Christian fill in the blank before or after that word, Species Unknown, and the second follow-up, Species Unleashed, these are fairly adult books. This is not. They're extremely well written. Your background shines in them, in the approach. But a lot of people would say, "Well, I'm not going to read that." I mean, it's written by a pastor in South Dakota, and it's number one on a Christian label. It reminds me of some of the Christian rock groups that I remember in the 70s when that became a growing. They were a little bit hard to tell from some of the metal groups that were out there. You had to pay attention to the lyrics to catch, because the beat wasn't too far off of that. So that's my point that I make about the books. I think they're well worth. And you have a couple other interesting ones that are out there as well. Before I turn you over to Chris, can you bring up the very interesting slide that Dan shared with us when we're talking? Sure. And I'm going to have Dan give a quick explanation about this, what this slide represents. Dan, Pastor Dan, a.k.a. Padre, could you take us through this real quick? I think it's a very interesting remark that you made with this.
This is a graphic that I was first exposed to when listening to a lecture by Dr. Jordan Peterson, who some people may recognize that name. It is a graphic prepared by Chris Harrison, who's an associate professor of human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon University, and Pastor Christoph Bromhild. To describe what you're looking at here, you have a black line on the bottom. This black line is actually composed of thousands of individual black lines crammed together. At the edge on the far left of the screen is Genesis. From far right, the end is the end of the book of Revelation. Every verse in the Bible has a vertical black line sticking up from that base. What they did with computer assistance is they took and they connected verses that referred to one another in some way, shape, or form. We call this in ministry or in church cross-referencing. And some Bibles have this. You'll open up a Bible, and in the margin there near the spine of the book, it'll list other verses that verse it's next to would connect to. Well, what they found here was more than 63,700 self-references to verses in the Bible. Keeping in mind that the Bible was written by more than 40 men over a period of time that spanned from when Job, the oldest book of the Bible, was written somewhere around 2000 BC to the end of the first century AD. So you've got a 2,100 year period there in which different men from different parts of the Mediterranean world wrote things that referred to the things that other men would be writing later, even centuries later. This makes the Bible the oldest hyperlinked document known to exist, if you want to think of it in that way. It truly is a miraculous book, and I encourage all to read it.
I just think it's a really interesting point because there is a lot of extraterrestrial, UFO, UAP activity that shows up in the Bible. It's there, and it's well worth the time to read for a lot of reasons. But I just wanted to share that with the audience because I thought it was a very interesting, and anything that has Dr. Peterson involved. I'm not sure if he's Mr. Peterson in. I'm very intrigued with he has one of the most engaging intellects of our time. I enjoy him. Chris, before we jumped to the break, you were leading us a little bit. Please pick it up.
No, the Padre had a question for me. Go ahead, Padre.
Yeah. You had mentioned invoking the name of Jesus in abductees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you familiar with a group called Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, or CE4? Have you heard of them?
I know what CE4 is. I've studied CE4. I have never had the contact with that group, but I can tell you that I work with experiencer research team. I'm on the experiencer research team for the Mutual UFO Network, and we work together and we work with hundreds of abductees. I mean, there's just so many, and these stories are all frightening. And it's not just evoking the name of Jesus. I mean, that actually Kathleen Martin, who probably started the whole thing, was one of the things she told abductees. It says, if you are, evoke the name of Jesus, because it has actually worked at times. Not all the time, but it has worked at times that the abduction experiences stops.
This group on their website, which I was reading earlier today, has a file, they claim, of 350 abductee instances that were halted when they invoked the name of Christ, and the beams went away. And if we look at... Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say...
If we consider
that Mr. Jordan, Mr. Jordan...
Don't make me separate you two. I'm going to start controlling...
Come on, man. We're just getting into this. Look, the thing that I believe, and I'll just put it in a nutshell, and I'll show a video of it too, Padre, is that I think, because of what Don actually put me on this road, I think there's something so sinister, so nefarious, that we're not going to see disclosure. And I think it's partly spiritual in this effect, because remember, Lou Elizondo and other people in the military have been told, we know what this is. We know it's demonic. They have said this. I have spoken to engineers and other people who have researched this and have talked to abductees, and they're starting to go to the other side, that there's something very nefarious, very demonic in some shape, happening with this. And let me play this video, and then I'll ask everybody what they think about it and stuff.
Years, to what end? So there are two possible explanations, obvious explanations. The first is the one you often hear, which is this is so heavy that if the public were to know about it, it would be just disruptive. It'd be too scary. Like, you don't want to scare people for no good reason. There's nothing we can do about it. And you also don't want to suggest that, the U.S. military isn't capable of protecting the country, the homeland. And it does suggest that. If you can't control these objects in your airspace, and that's known, if they can't, that's known, okay, then that suggests a limit to the power of the U.S. military, and you don't want to tell people that because then they won't believe that they're safe. I get it. But then there's a deeper level, which is okay, what's your relationship with these things? What is the U.S. government's relationship with these things? And there's evidence that there is a relationship and that it's a longstanding, and that raises a lot of questions about intent. And so what is that? And I just personally decided, and people have been hurt by these things. That's a fact. That's a fact. It's a knowable fact. It's a provable fact. And killed. And I'm not saying millions of people have been killed by whatever these things are, but people have been killed, and it's known because it's working its way through the courts out of the VA. So, I don't know, an object that is by definition supernatural, it's above the laws of nature as we understand them, and that has resulted in the deaths of people. But we don't spend enough time thinking about what that adds up to. Not good, actually, not good.
So, based on what I've learned, I think there's something very nefarious, possibly demonic, possibly a spiritual type of war going on. We've seen through like Donna says, we've seen through history that there are paintings and everything that show wars that we can't explain. Fights in the sky with things that are going on. So I think we have to start looking in different directions for answers.
No, I agree with you. And it's like I said at the very beginning of the program, more than one thing can be true at once. And are all UAPs demonic? No, I don't think they are. But I do agree with you that there is a component of this, and I'm particularly speaking about the abduction and those instances where people are harmed or they are made afraid and they feel that sense of helplessness. That's not the way that God works. That's not the way that his angels work. That is the way that demons would work. And we know from scripture that they can take any form. They can manifest themselves in the most horrible monster your mind has ever conceived, or they can come to you as an angel of light with flowers and trumpets. The thing that they do is that they deceive, and their goal is the destruction of humanity, to take as many humans with them as possible. So I think you're spot on there, Chris.
Thank you.
Hey, John, you spent part of your career, and really before you defined it into your investigative work for UFO Magazine, on animal mutilations and the nearly unsolvable reasons behind that. And the reason I bring that up, because obviously, to me, there seems to be something very evil in that situation. And to answer your question, Chris, I think the other important part that Tucker Carlson brought up is that I think it's a very logical conclusion, and I think a lot of events around us are playing out to make this seem a lot more possible, probable, active, is that some kind of an agreement, some kind of an accommodation has been made that some people do have the understanding, and it's the reckoning of that coming out is just too great a price to pay for power, for stability, whatever it is. So I think that second part fits in there very well, and that's always been my theory.
I just want to throw this out here. I see the world changing because I talk to Don all the time. I keep saying Don's name, and Don's not even replying to me. You're making me feel bad, Don.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you while you're talking, pal.
Well, I'm just saying, we talk about, Don and I talk probably once a week about the world events that are going on. And you could see the emergence of, and I don't want to turn this into a spiritual show, but you see the emergence of evil. I mean, you talk about Epstein Island. You're talking about Sean Combs, P. Diddy, whatever the hell his name is. You see these terrible things happening with people who we look to as a figurehead, and we're looking at these people and we're saying, oh my God, look at the terrible things that they're doing. And, these are people that, even young kids hold in high esteem. And then we find out that they're really very evil people. Human trafficking, drugs, hurting people, and stuff of that nature. And then now we get spiritual wars between Hamas and the Palestine and Israel. And I mean, this is stuff that start coming throughout the world, and people are just going after each other.
Well, I am going to interrupt you for 1 second, Chris.
There you go, buddy.
And I got to give props to the Israeli Defense Force for thinking outside the box. They're
so far outside the box. They're back in the woods when the box was still on trees before they took it down and turned it into paper and made it into a box that exploded on command.
I was talking to my wife about that earlier today, and I said, good God, talk about the world of dirty tricks. You don't poke the bear and then act surprised when the bear gets real pissed off and cuffs you, okay? But talking about what Chris was talking about roughly 12, 15 years ago, one morning, okay, I have a routine that I do almost every day. Thanks, sweetheart. I make a pot of coffee. I get it ready the night before. I've got a timer on my pot. It brews it, and when I come out, it's ready to go. And I sat down like I often do to enjoy my cup and turned on the radio. And whatever was on the news that morning, it was something totally outrageous. And my wife came out then, and she got a cup, sat down, and I said, sweetie, you're never going to believe what I just heard. And then whatever outrageous thing it was, I told her. And then suddenly I stopped. And I may have said this to you guys before, but I said, Vicki, it's almost as if we drifted into an alternate dimension because we didn't have this kind of business going on. I was born in the 50s. I grew up in the 60s. I graduated high school in 68. I came from an area on the East Coast, Pennsylvania, where in the fall, it was like Christmas and Easter and New Year's all rolled up because hunting season began. And at that time, all my friends and I, we hunted small game and what have you. Everybody had access to a firearm. You never heard about school shootings or this crazy business that's so prevalent today. And I said, my God, I said, wait a minute. The CERN, what the hell do you call it? The
Super Collider.
Super Collider. What are they doing with that thing? Well, this is a huge device. They're looking for exotic materials. They shoot particles around practically at light speed, depending upon it to hit another particle coming the other way, and then examining what they found. They were looking for the God particle. Remember that? Everybody was talking about finding the God particle. Well, what if they opened up a portal? Now, Chris is correct. There is a distinctive sense of evil stalking the land. And this is something that it's hard to dismiss. It's there, my God. For example, this past spring, Jewish Americans in this nation, especially on college campuses, were put at extreme risk for no other reason than they were Jewish. Okay? And who was doing this? Supporters of a terrorist murdering and raping group called Hamas. On our land, they were marching with these flags after they had invaded some Jewish enclaves and massacred and slaughtered innocent women, children, men, beheading babies, for God's sake. You don't get any more evil than that. And I'll just say it because I don't broach my words. Those sons of bitches murdered little tiny children. And we had students supposedly celebrating that. Now, by God, if that's not evil, I don't know what is evil.
It seems to me that I'm sorry. It seems to me that we have a consensus, though the commander has not yet weighed in, that evil seems to be on the march in the world. So when I was at Cabela's, I had a mentoring relationship with the CEO, and he always said to me, Dan, never bring me a problem unless you bring me a solution to the problem as well. So guys, if these entities, or some of these entities, UAP entities, are evil, and if they have aligned themselves with certain rich or powerful people on the planet, or perhaps they've taken the form of them, who knows? What do we do? What do we do about it?
Well, I may have a solution. It wouldn't be a pretty solution, okay? Because I've come from the school of hard knocks, not only as a soldier, but also as a police officer. In my time, and this is going to sound like I'm exaggerating, I'm not, I've been shot 4 times, okay? Twice in Vietnam, twice as a cop. Now, as a result, I have a short shrift when it comes to acting out and acting up. All right? Blame me, all right? Because that's just the way it is with me. But those people, if it would have been up to me on those campuses, I would have given, especially the foreigners, a choice. Knock it off right now, or I'm going to take your little patootie down to the nearest airline. I'm going to put you on a aircraft, and I'm going to drop your butt off in some country in the Middle East that'll take you. And if they don't want to take you, I'll be happy to stick a parachute on you and throw your ass off. Okay? That's one way. As far as the American students, every one of those kids was violating college rules, regulations, policy, if not the law. I got to tell you, I get very upset when I see somebody desecrating or destroying an American flag, a flag that I bled for. All right? That's my flag. I love that flag. I love the idea of what this nation is. And if that makes me a toxic male, well, by God, so be it. That's what I am. And I would have given those kids a choice, too. You either settle it down right now, get your ass back to class, or we're going to throw you off campus. You're gone. You're done. That's the end, period. That's how I would have handled it. But as we all saw in congressional hearings, every one of those college presidents were milquetoast. They couldn't even describe what hate speech was when it dealt with killing Jews. Okay? Now,
Don, I got to grab you here, Don. I don't mind the conversation, but it's getting so far away from UAP.
It's
UFO.
evil. It's about evil.
I know, Don.
That's what we're talking about.
There's
an evil afoot that is influencing everything around us.
Let me interject here. Maybe go back up a little bit from the tactical to the strategic. If there is interdimensional evil force that seeks the destruction of humanity, what do we do about it? Fortunately, the Bible has an answer. There's a passage in the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verses 10 to 13. It says, "Finally, be strengthened in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Clothe yourselves with the full armor of God, that you will be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, the powers, and the world rulers of this darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places." It says here, we're at war with both the physical manifestation of evil, which might be some of these UAP and their aliens,
Sure.
and also with the spiritual force. And it prescribes what we can do. Here's what you could do. Number one, you put on the helmet of salvation, it says. That's get yourself right with God. Get yourself in a position where you have that covering over your head. Next, it says put on the breastplate of righteousness. What's that? It means live righteously. Don't get sucked into the evil. Do good. Show love to your fellow man. Next thing, put on the belt of truth. That belt of truth means we don't give in to the people who say you can create your own truth. We say that there is absolute truth. And when we pursue it, we pursue what is right and just. It says, shod your feet with the good news. Tell other people, like we are in this broadcast, that you don't need to face these beings alone. There is a way that you can do it with God's help.
But Padre, let me ask you this. Why is the government hiding UFOs and UAPs? Why are they changing the agenda? If this is something that's so good, UAPs and extraterrestrials are going to come down. That's what people are thinking. They're going to come down here and solve all our problems. Why have the government now changed their agenda and they start calling it a threat? UAPs are now a threat. And they are right in congressional hearings. They're saying these things are a threat. They're asking pilots, are they a threat? The pilots are saying, yes, they are. There's no technology that can, keep up with these things. And now you're seeing something. First, they didn't acknowledge it. Then they acknowledged it. But now they're saying the acknowledgement is a threat. And we have to look at this as a threat. So I'm asking you, one, do you think we're going to get disclosure, and why not?
I think we will get a disclosure. The question is it going to be a truthful disclosure? I think that there are people in powerful positions who know what these things are and have aligned themselves with them. And there's an agenda there. And what we will see is an acknowledgement of something, whether they call it interdimensional, interplanetary, intergalactic, dormant humans coming up from the ground, whatever it is. They're going to give us a straw man to fight. But maybe that's not the real battle we ought to be fighting. We should be watching the other hand. Because right now there just seems to be such a concerted effort to master the manipulation of us, to move people in the water course that they want to send us.
Right, but you see, one part of the government is saying these are a threat. Another part of the government is saying nothing to see here, folks. And they literally are coming up with some of the most cockamamie things I've ever seen. And, for instance, here's the head of the Naval Intelligence And he's trying to say, well, I really can't get you a picture because we don't have a computer that can stop this. This is a joke. Watch this.
Chairman Schiff, Chairman Carlson, Ranking Member Crawford, and committee members, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today to highlight the ongoing work of the Department of Defense regarding unidentified aerial phenomena. Since the early 2000s, we have seen an increasing number of unauthorized and or unidentified aircraft or objects in military-controlled training areas and training ranges and other designated airspace. Reports of sightings are frequent and continuing. We attribute this increase in reporting to a number of factors, including our work to destigmatize reporting, an increase in the number of new systems such as quadcopters and unmanned aerial systems that are in our airspace, identification of what we can classify as clutter, mylar balloons, and other types of air trash, and improvements in the capabilities of our various sensors to detect things in our airspace. Almost 2 years ago, in August of 2020, Deputy Secretary of Defense Nordquist directed the establishment of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force within the Department of the Navy. The UAP Task Force was built on the foundation of the Navy's initial efforts to respond to the reports from our aviators on unidentified objects observed in our training ranges. The basic issues then and now are twofold. First, incursions in our training ranges by unidentified objects represent serious hazards to safety of flight. In every aspect of naval aviation, safety of our air crews is paramount. Second, intrusions by unknown aircraft or objects pose potential threats to the security of our operations. Our aviators train as they would fight. So any intrusions that may compromise the security of our operations by revealing our capabilities, our tactics, techniques, or procedures are of great concern to the Navy and the Department of Defense. From the very beginning, we took these reports very seriously. We instituted a data-driven approach to the investigations where we could collect as much data as possible and use all available resources to analyze and make informed decisions on the best ways to address our findings. Our main objective was to transition UAP efforts from an anecdotal or narrative-based approach to a rigorous science and technology engineering-focused study.
So, in essence, he's saying there, this is the head of naval intelligence. I think it's Scott Bray. And he's trying to explain there that now these things are a danger to our pilots, a danger to our testing. This has been going on for 70 years. This is nothing new. They've been flying around for 70 years. And, for 70 years, they haven't been a threat.
I mean, excuse me, Chris. You've handled criminals a large part of your career.
Yeah.
We've have children in our families. You're not used to a certain story getting changed when caught, cornered, evidence is presented, certain things go on there that you go, hey, I know what I'm going to try. I'm going to try truth, not the complete truth. I'm going to give you a version of the truth. I'm going to put a little truth in there. And then I'm going to put a bunch of word salad around it. Now, taking nothing away from the eminence of the speaker. That was BS. There's a lot of nouns. There's a lot of nouns in there, not a lot of verbs. And then when we get to the verbs, there's very few nouns that connect up with it.
And the thing is, you and I, Commander, know that's a bunch of BS. But some people take that as gospel because they believe everything that the government tells them. And we know that's
another reason why we may be here, and another reason why I want to throw this out to all of you to chew on. Are we seeing the UAP activity that we are as a result because of our breakdown as a group of entities on this planet? Lack of a moral compass, a pullback from religions and religious type creeds around the planet. Is that what is attracting, or is it being driven by our interdimensional extraterrestrial visitors that we are approaching the battle? Now, before Dan jumps in, because I think Dan can point to some of that on the right of that really pretty picture that we saw, that kind of fits into some of the things that we're up against. So before the Padre jumps in on that, I put it to both my co-hosts. Are we seeing the activity we're seeing because our behaviors are driving it and making it more hospitable? Or are we reacting to the situation that's going on? Or is it a little bit of both?
Go ahead, Don.
From my standpoint, I see an increasing collapse of our society and our culture. When you have practically half the population of this country we all live in that can't even describe what a woman is, or conversely, okay, that a biological male can menstruate, and they teach that, and they claim that, and they scream that from the highest building, you know something has gone rotten in Denmark. So yeah, I see this as part and parcel of the overall collapse of our culture as we've always known it.
So my question to you, Don, are we being driven to it, or is our conduct is what's driving UAP activity? That's my question.
I think we're being driven to it.
Chris.
I agree with Don. I think we're being driven to it. I see that the government's agenda has changed rapidly. And, you know, stuff that leaks out makes it feel to me like it's on a timeline that they want to push it on. And they do have a certain agenda that they want to make sure that we stay on with the UAP experience. And, you know, we've all talked about the, you know, where it's, whether it's rumor, gossip, whatever, but one of the things that they come out and said, they have a false alien invasion. I mean, several people have talked about that. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't have any evidence to say the government's done that. However, I will tell you that I do know there's evidence that the government has tried to start wars. They've tried to start a war with Cuba under Project Northrop. They've tried to in the Gulf of Tonkin, which they were successful with, and for Vietnam. They've tried in other effects. So, is this credible that they want us to show an alien invasion? Therefore, money gets pumped into the military-industrial complex. That we have to give up certain rights in order for the government to protect us. And do we now start running to the hills, or beg certain people to save us from the aliens that are coming to Earth? So I think we're on a timeline that they are fabricating to make us go to that spot.
Padre Dan, as you answer this, I'd also like to return back to one of the things you said in the opening of the show.
Okay.
Is this setting up for the grand moment where the reveal, or whatever is to be revealed, if that happens, and here's the receipt, here's the price that's due. Going back to your earlier part, pick whatever group, pick whatever thing. That's the price that has to be paid, because we are at a point now, and I think all of us would agree, what we've been driven to and what's been unique, I think, for us as Americans in the sense of the United States, is that for a long time, we looked at liberty and the ability to go do what we want to do within the constraints of laws and civilized behavior was our destiny. And now that's changing. We're trying to be morphed into all these things are a threat, and the only way that this threat can be answered is you're going to have to go with us. I think there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 5 years that line up with that immensely. But Dan, what do you think? Do you see where I'm tracking with this?
I think so. And I think that, again, turning to my compass, which is scripture, there's a game clock for humanity, if you will. And the Bible, if you read it, states very clearly things that will happen as human history begins to wind down. And among those things is widespread, pervasive evil, abandonment of basic values that have sustained civilization for centuries: family, church, community, institutions that were cherished and no longer are. The thing that's different about what I'm seeing now is that this seems to be going on globally, whereas every country can point to its history and there are ebbs and flows between good and evil over certain countries. What we're seeing now is the world becoming increasingly hostile to itself. I mean, I cannot remember a time since the 60s when I grew up when talk of World War III has been as pervasive as it is right now. So what do people look for in these situations? They look for a way out. They look for somebody who's going to come and make everything better. The Bible tells us there is going to arise an individual, call him the Antichrist, maybe 100 years from now, maybe a year from now. And some event is going to happen that's going to cause the world as a whole to rally around this individual and his government. What is that triggering mechanism? Is it interdimensional beings that come and land a saucer at the United Nations and say, we're here and here's our guy, and endorse him? And all the world goes, yay, problem solved, until we begin to see what the true agenda is? All I can say, Commander, is that we need to be ready for any contingency. And that means being prepared physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
So for all of you, Genghis Khan, one of our very dedicated listeners, just wrote something in the chat that I think is worthy of the discussion. We can be very talented. Imagine if we did all work together as humans. So could some of the UAP force, the evil, be creating problems for us just to keep us humans oblivious to their agenda? I think that that's a fair proposition to discuss here. And one other part that I'd like to add into that. When you take a statement like that, is it all part of the plan? The part that Don has talked about and written about quite extensively and quite eloquently, that a special access program, the controls that have been put on that, is something like a satanic force behind that. It's easy for me to think that, yes, that could be easily in league with that. But what I'm driving at is, do you stoke the fear globally, Dan, as you just said? Tear down institutions, tear down foundational developments that civilizations have gone through. It's not just here. If you look at Asia, especially in China, you see, I'm speaking of the communist part of it, a country that is in decline because they put a certain policy out that said you could only have one child, as they were trying to get some kind of handle on their inability to properly feed and take care of people in that part of the world. And so now the disposal of second children or children that were not male, because that was the desired outcome, you now have a country that no longer has the ability to produce generations out. But my point is, that was a very family-oriented culture where the generational support. I've had numerous close friends from that part of the world where their grandparents and the aunts and uncles, it mirrored many of the things that I saw from European experience, which is on my background. What you see, the same kind of destructive forces that have gone on in the Middle East. All these places have this. Is that the goal? Is that to drive this to the point so that when this comes out, it happens? I think Genghis Khan deserves a quick run. I'll start with you, Don.
Well, okay. Talking about this, it reminds me of something that Ingo Swann said to me 15, 20 years ago. Now, if you don't know who that was, he was the man, one of the most truly gifted psychics known to the world at that time. He was the man that designed the protocols that allowed military personnel then in the remote viewing program that was being run by the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA. And we were talking about, well, I was very deeply involved in lunar research on inexplicable things being seen on the moon. He had an astounding incident that happened with him in remote viewing the moon, where he stated he encountered intelligence on the rear of the moon, the side that we never see from Earth, the far side. And he said that whatever it was he discovered there was angry and resentful when they detected his presence. They were not happy at all. He actually feared for a number of months that he would be tracked down and murdered. But to make a long story short, he said they know that the human race has a telepathic talent, some much more powerful than others, but regardless, we all, to an extent, have telepathic powers, and they are fearful of that. They do not like that. They don't want that. Now, you can pull that apart in any number of different ways, okay? Maybe it's seen by the adversary as a direct connection to a supreme power, a supreme being, or perhaps they see it as a threat because they also have a psychic talent and they see that as competition. I don't know. But whatever the bottom line is, they don't like it and they see us as an enemy. Now, with that being said, if there's one group of visitors coming here, there are multiple groups. This is something I've encountered time and time and time again in my time in the UFO field. The bottom line is this: they all don't get along, but there has always been described to me one group who have a total antipathy toward humanity. For whatever reason, they don't like us. So take it for what it's worth.
Chris?
Well, I think Genghis Khan is pretty much spot on with what he's saying. I think if you go back in time, and if you believe the theory that our government has made treaties with these, or agreements, not treaties, but agreements with extraterrestrials, demonic entities, whatever, it shows me that the upper echelon of our society doesn't really give a damn about the lower end of society. And when he talks about separating us, I think the ufology field is a perfect place to put that, because if you start going down a path of how dangerous they are, how threatening they are, and then you want to come up with something that will, first divide us, which is what they've done. And then if they want to bring us back together under their control, under a UFO control, UAP control, whatever, you manifest a threat that people can see. And I think that's what one of the things Genghis Khan was trying to say in his thing. And I agree with that. I think we're on a timeline for that stuff to spiritually happen. And I think the ufology field, the UFO field, plays a very distinct part into it, because they can create, because we don't know a lot about it, and they can create any type of scenario they want with it.
Agreed. Dan, I'm going to pose a question for you.
Okay.
I grew up in a similar way that you did. It was Roman Catholic with my parents as I was growing up. But my dad was extremely interested in the subject of UFOs, still is, and thankfully still with us. I have never found it incompatible with my Christian faith. I sum up Christianity and I'm a good small C Christian. I'm never going to be a good capital C Christian, but as a small C Christian, it's pretty easy. Once you get past understanding what's required, it sums it up. You have to love everyone. You just don't have to like everyone within the human circle. That's how I put it together. But have you had any conflict, or has it taken you time to get to the point where your part of your life's work now as a pastor, is it in conflict with these subjects? It doesn't appear to be. For me, it's not. And I know from Don and Chris, we've had these talks to varying degrees over the years, so I know it's not with them either. I don't see it as a conflict.
No, for me personally, it is not. And I think that the excuse that some people say for not disclosing about it destroying religion have a gross misunderstanding of what faith is. This faith that I have is every bit as real and personal to me as a relationship that I have with any human. And when you enter into that close a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, it is something that permeates your whole existence, and nothing can take that from you. You look at all the times in history that Christians have been persecuted, going willingly to their death rather than renounce the faith. It's because they know who they've believed in and are persuaded that he's able to keep everything you've committed to him until that day of judgment. And so for me, I don't see any conflict at all. When you talk about, and in fact, when people talk about beings from other dimensions, demonic possibilities, these things are all in the Bible. We already know all this stuff. It's not going to, if anything, it may bolster some people's faith. You say, well, what if, Dan, they actually do have someone from another planet come? Bible doesn't address that. So, there's really nothing I could say about that other than back in the 80s, early 80s.
In my father's house, there are many mansions.
Indeed. There was a Christian folk singer, rock guy named Larry Norman, and he had a song called UFO that was a big hit on the radio. And in that, he said, if there's life on other planets, I'm sure that God must know, and he's been there once already and has died to save their soul. So he's got them taken care of on their plan, and he's given us our plan.
I want to return to your written works, okay, and tie it in with some stuff that's going to be come up in future shows. Mm-hmm. Often with UAP activity, we have cryptids.
Yep.
Now, your particular manifestation in your books, it goes pretty demonic and pretty dark pretty quick. There isn't a lot of literary foreplay. Let's just say you get down on the main act pretty quick. Now, here I am talking foreplay with a pastor, with Chris and Don looking on. Truly, we have moved to different levels in this show, no doubt. To all of you three, do you see that as part of the interdimensionality, or that aspect of it, why this happens? or do you think that there's a particular reason that these things manifest going on? Is it something that's being triggered on purpose as a fear factor, as a destabilizing factor to go to that? Don, what do you think?
Well, okay, cryptids are something that have always been with us, going back into history. For example, the Loch Ness creature, whatever that is, it's been there for well over 1,000 years. In this country, things like dogmen, things like the skinwalker, things like Bigfoot, okay, the Sasquatch, they've been around forever. The Native Americans have talked about them since they've had encounters with the Europeans that came over here. So I don't see that as any great thing. But there have also been other things. And I'm talking primarily, and I go back, and I knew him, I go back to the mid-'70s. I knew author, researcher, writer John Keel. And Keel did a mind-blowing book called The Mothman Prophecies. It came out around 75, 76. I knew about the book. I got a copy of the book immediately. When I talked to Keel about it, he encountered some very strange things that seemed to be associated with the phenomenon. So I think in part, Commander, yes, there is a definite linkage with some of these things to the UFO UAP phenomenon.
Dan, we're down to our last 2-3 minutes. So I thank the audience, the greatest on the planet, once again for tuning in. I thank Chris and Don joining us. I'm going to give you the final minute or so here as we drive out. Do you think there's an overlap? Was it part of the inspiration to your book?
I think there is. The creatures in my book were actually drawn from Lakota mythology. Being here in the Dakotas, somewhat familiar with some of the creatures that they have in their myths. But as far as, Bigfoot, really quick, I went to Alaska a number of years ago, and I was really interested in the subject. How could something so big hide? I had a cameraman with me. We were doing a TV show, and he had me go 5 feet into the Alaskan brush. I'm a reasonably sized guy, and I did a sound bite 5 feet away. You would not have known I was there. I was completely concealed by the brush. And I have no doubt in my mind that in this great, wonderful planet of ours, there are still many wildlife mysteries ready to be discovered. You know how many new species were discovered last year? 25,000 new species that we never found before. That's pretty awesome when you stop to think about it. It's a great, big, wonderful.
As long as we don't have the arrogance that we think that somehow it makes us greater because we made the discoveries, instead of realizing our insignificance and our connection to the rest of it.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, thank you for a great show. Dan Carlson, DanCarlsonWrites.com. Please take a look at his website. Please take a look at some of the great stuff that he's written. He and his wife did a very interesting book on the King James Bible, which is one of my favorites. I've shared it with a number of people, and it's been a really special night. Don, Chris, as always, thank you, sirs. And to the greatest audience on the planet, we will look forward to seeing you again next week real soon. Keep an eye out for Andy's show. And make sure that you take a look at these guys Wednesday, Andy and Darcy, excuse me. Until next week, UAP Crossfire, KGRA DB out here.